Good evening. I call to order this meeting of the Gladstone City Council. This is a work session for Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. It's about 5:32 p.m. Let's see, we'll start with a roll call, please.
Councillor Huckabee. Councillor Alexander.
Yes.
Councillor Reichel.
Present.
Councillor Cook. Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Garlington.
Here.
Mayor Milch.
Present. We have a quorum, so we'll begin the meeting. Let's stand for the flag salute, please. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The City of Gladstone is abiding by guidelines set forth in House Bill 2560, which requires the governing body of the public body, to the extent reasonably possible, to make all meetings accessible remotely through technological means and provide opportunity for members of the general public to remotely submit oral and written testimony during meetings to the extent in-person oral and written testimony is allowed. Therefore, this meeting will be open to the public both in person and virtually using the Zoom platform. The Zoom instructions are printed on the meeting agenda. The public is welcome to attend the work session in person or online. However, no public comment will be allowed. That's our policy for work sessions. This is just an opportunity for us to be exposed to some of the items that will be coming before us later on. We can give some input, but there will be public hearings on, for example, the code amendment item that's on our agenda tonight. So this doesn't mean the public won't be involved at any point. They will be in the future. So we have three items, one regarding certified local government program, the second regarding proposed amendments to the Gladstone Municipal Code, Chapter 17.78, which is regarding home occupations. And number three is the use of unappropriated as yet American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds. And then also included in this is an updated city council agenda planning document. So item number one, certified local government program. I'll turn to staff for an introduction of this item.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council. A couple years ago, I made a commitment to the Gladstone Historical Society that once we had resources in place that could help them research what a certified local government program is and the benefits to the preservation of history in Gladstone, that I would fulfill that commitment. We recently hired our economic development coordinator and tourism coordinator, Marcy, who is here with us tonight, and she has secured Curry Gill, who's with the Oregon Heritage, to talk about the certified local government program for Gladstone. We're trying to be a better partner for the Historical Society, which, as you know, just recently became a nonprofit. Our local historian, Kim Huey, is present tonight for the presentation. And I also know that Councillor Alexander is a member of the Historical Society. Curry's joining us on Zoom tonight, so I'm going to have her go over the certified local government program, and then we could talk a little bit about what the next steps would be.
Okay. Ms. Gill, we're happy to have you here, and let us know what you have for us.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors, for your time tonight, for having me. I'm Curry Gill. I'm with the State Historic Preservation Office, which is part of Oregon Heritage. We're based in Salem. I also have a bit of a cold, which is why I'm not there in person today. So excuse me if I have to pause and take a cough for a second. I'll be right back to you. So again, thank you so much for having me. I have visited Gladstone a few times. I've had conversations with folks there over the years. And you have some really great historic resources in your community. And I'm really glad to hear that you're interested in exploring the Certified Local Government Program. So this program is actually a federal program operated under the State Historic Preservation Office. We receive funding from the National Park Service to implement several federal programs, including one that you might be familiar with, the National Register of Historic Places. There are also federal compliance programs which come into play when federal funds are involved. So you probably have been involved with that and will continue to be as you decide to expend your federal funds in your conversation later tonight. The Certified Local Government Program is actually required of state historic preservation offices by the National Park Service. But in Oregon, we really like the program, so we are not bothered that it's a requirement. We actually really value this program because what it does is it encourages local communities to take a look at their historic places and have conversations with people in their community and determine what's significant and what's worth preserving and recognizing and hopefully celebrating and keeping around for the long run as an asset to your community. We at the state can come in and talk about things like I just said, how many great resources you have, but you know way better than I do. And so hopefully in this process, I'll be learning a bunch more about your community. So this program, as I said, is a requirement of the National Park Service. And with the funding that we receive from them to implement all of the programs under the State Historic Preservation Office, we are required to award a portion of those grant funds to our participating local governments for their preservation programs. We're required to award about 10%. We usually aim for around 25% of the funding we get every year. In Oregon, we have about 57 CLGs, about 54 of those are active. They range from towns the size of Weston in northeastern Oregon to Portland. And they have to do a few things to participate in the program, and then they get a few things in turn. So, excuse me, the basic requirements are that there is a commission or board whose job it is to promote the historic places, encourage the community to preserve them, and if you have a regulatory program, manage the design review of that program. They are required to meet 4 times a year. You're supposed to attempt to get historians or archaeologists. There's a list of professionals, but if you can't get those people, we can help. Our office can help provide training to do the program. You're required to have or work to document the historic places. So we'll probably talk a little bit about that tonight. Have a process for locally designating those historic places. So getting a local historic landmark. Reviewing nominations to the National Register that come from your community. And yeah, that's most of it. That makes you eligible for additional assistance, training, access to workshops, and other supports from our office, and also for the grant dollars. It isn't a giant grant. If you apply every time you can, it's offered every other year. So we find that having that little extra time to complete projects is really helpful. As you know, cities are super, super busy and have a lot on their plates. So if they can have a little breathing room in expending these funds, that's really helpful. But it's funding you can count on. So it's non-competitive. We find out from the federal government how much money we're getting. We take that 25% and then we divide it among the applicants for that year. So that's why we have an every other year cycle, so that because we have so many, you can have a chunk of money. Lately, it's been ranging between $12,000 and $15,000, and that can be used to promote preservation of historic properties, which can be doing fun things like scavenger hunts, or some people have done like in-town sort of escape room kind of things, coloring books, events to participating in community events to let people know about the historic resources. For buildings themselves, doing local or national register designation processes, documenting what historic buildings exist, doing structural assessments or design plans for properties. If you get properties listed on the National Register, it can also be used for actual bricks and mortar projects on historic properties. We do have a couple of communities that use their grant funding for that. So it is very specific funding, but we have found ways that most communities are able to use it to promote those historic resources. So that's kind of the big overview of the program, and I'm happy to take questions in regard to that. I do usually hear questions about the difference between documenting historic properties and designation and what that designation means. So if you have those kinds of questions, I can delve into that a little bit this evening as well.
Thank you, Curry. Our written report to prepare us did talk about the difference between the inventory of properties that leads possibly to designation. But one of the questions I had, you speak of places or properties, but is the preservation, does it go beyond that? We have, for example, here in our city hall, we have the original desk used by the judge who was one of the founders of our city. That has the historical significance to us, but it's not a building or a place. It's, you know, basically what you'd call a, I don't know, an item, an artifact, historical. I understand there are more things like that that we don't have on display, but that exist in our community. Also, Gladstone was at one time a streetcar city. The streetcar system that went from Oregon City through Gladstone down the hill toward the city of Portland was the primary means of transportation for a lot of people in the early years of this city. And the tracks are still under the asphalt in our main streets, the tracks associated with that old streetcar system. So can you tell me a little something about artifacts or infrastructure that's may have historical nature? Do we all of a sudden are not able to work on our streets because we have historical train tracks in them? Or tell me a little how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the objects first. This program does not generally address objects or historic items, although we have other programs we could help out with. So our Mentor Core program could definitely help if you have questions about cataloging or caretaking or disposition of those kind of items. But this fund would not work for that. It is essentially place-based. There are objects that can be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. There are several boats. There are train engines. The Paul Bunyan Museum in Portland, or museum statue in Portland, is listed on the National Register. So there are items, but they tend to be bigger kinds of items and not small ones. So that the trolley track question is interesting. First of all, most communities in Oregon have some of those somewhere in there. And most of your infrastructure is on public owned land. So any regulatory actions that come with having those trolley tracks in your infrastructure and having to deal with that actually already exists for you. So if it's on the highway, then ODOT has to deal with that. They get tons of federal funding. That is a requirement of the federal program. There is a state law in Oregon for public owned properties. And so that is a conversation then if it's city owned or even county owned streets or infrastructure, that the State Historic Preservation Office should be contacted when you're having impacts on those resources. We have seen some communities actually kind of embrace those resources and use the certified local government grant funding to like highlight an area where you can see them and do some interpretation about it. And if you're thinking about, I know a lot of communities are bringing trolleys back, like bus trolleys back. So you can use that to really tie in the promotion of this new trolley system and have some interpretation and information shared about the original ones and the tracks that you can still see. I've seen some communities even do like a walking path along the route of the old ones and tell stories, and they use phone devices to trigger moments where you can hear different stories about the locations along the track pathway.
All right, well, that's helpful. I'm glad that our economic development and tourism director is here tonight to hear some of those comments because, it gets us thinking creatively. And it's good to know that your department has such good insights into this and good experience with it. So I'll open it up to questions from other council members, those present or those online. None from Councilor Roberts. Councilor Alexander, go ahead.
I just have a couple. So first of all, I know when I was looking into this with other cities and stuff. So if you get in this program, you get enough money to you're supposed to have a section 106 citywide survey, right? Is that one of the things that says you have to get into the program?
So survey is a component of the program, and you should have a system to have survey, but it's not a requirement when you start. It's certainly a recommendation to get going with preservation, so you have a sense of what you have and if it meets historic standards and its level of significance. Currently, there are some properties surveyed in Gladstone, and they are listed in the historic sites database. You can use our state system for that. You don't have to create a giant system. Many of our CLGs actually just have the paper documents. And you can use the grant funding to do that survey work. Okay.
Yeah, I see you've seen people have paid from $6,000 to $8,000 for that survey. So I just wondered, the other question that was, how does this House Bill 2001, does that impact any historic preservation? Will it affect preserving houses in Gladstone? So they can't take and split like a duplex up and, put 5 duplexes on a historic piece of property there? What's the effect on it for us?
It does not affect that. So what they have to do is meet the preservation standards. So if we were to split a building from a single family unit or a single unit to a 3-unit, the way they do that, like if they did an addition to make that happen, the way they do that would have to meet the preservation standards, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. In fact, most of our historic districts actually have a real diversity of property types and number of units on a property. So it was common in the past already to do that. So they just have to meet the design requirements.
All right, thank you. And then once we do this and we're in this, Gladstone will be able to set up its own historic district, right?
Yes, so you could create your own local historic district, and you could also use the funding and resources to develop a National Register listed district or individual designations. The city of Dallas right now is working on a downtown historic district. They've been working on it for about 6 years and developing the support for it. And that's going to go through really soon. They just are finishing up the documentation now. So you can do both processes.
Okay, I think that's all I had. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
All right, Councilor Garland, did you have any questions?
No, I think my questions are more geared towards our local people.
Counselor, can you turn on your microphone? Thank you.
My sincere apologies. I think my questions are more for our local. As much as I would love to say I've made it to a historical meeting, I haven't. You know how how it would benefit our group. That's what I want to hear from someone in our group, if that's possible.
All right. We normally don't have public testimony on this, but I understand we have.
I can speak to that a
Oh,
little
there.
bit, Mindy, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I spoke with Curry about this kind of what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks of this, what do we get from this? And I know she's going to touch on that. And there's really not a lot of drawbacks. The only drawback is that it takes some work on the front end to get this created. And one question I think that would tie into what you're saying is, Curry, when you were speaking about the, say that a property was being remodeled and that needed to meet the historic preservation standards, are these the standards that our historic preservation committee would decide on, or are they state regulated, or kind of a mixture of both?
You're muted.
Okay.
Oh, there. Okay.
Thank you. So the design standards would be locally decided. So just to give an example, one of the important standards in preservation is related to the materials. And let's say windows. Say somebody has historic windows in their house. They're locally designated. That local designation is what triggers the design review. So not National Register, not just being on the inventory survey. They have to have done the public process to have their property locally designated in the process that you create in your code when you do this program. So they have the property. People usually only do that when they care about preserving their property. So they're usually prepared to follow those standards. So they want to replace their windows, and they're the original wood windows, and they want to replace all the windows in the house. And in the back of the house, they want to have a wider window rather than two singles next to each other. So in some communities, if it's not visible from the street, they would allow that. They would allow a change in the window opening on the non-visible street side, but because it would impact the character of the district or the property from the street view side, those windows need to maintain the same opening that they had before. So those are ways that you locally can determine how much or how little you want to regulate the preservation of those historic properties. And you can get assistance from our office in those conversations, and how to think about what's lost or gained in those choices, because you want people to participate in the program. You want to make it easy for them to participate in the program, and but you still want to preserve the historic properties. So those are all important things to think about, but those happen in your local code.
Counselor Garlington, if I could add, I think the overarching value is that this helps the Gladstone Historical Society preserve history in Gladstone, and it opens up funding opportunities. The city would be the conduit for that. So for instance, if we were able to create an inventory of all the properties that want to be designated historic in Gladstone, then that would allow the Historic Society access for funding for interpretive historic signages that we could place in front of those properties. They have an interest in doing a haunted walk around town during this time of the year. And so it provides them the ability to access funding to accomplish some of the projects that they want to do. Visiting historic museums is a big tourism draw as well. Ultimately, the goal would be for them to have a building to become a museum in. So this is one step along that process. And moving forward into 2024, the council will have to consider adopting a ordinance to talk about all the things that Curry just explained. And that is where we would invite the Historical Society to provide input before we adopt any local ordinance on that, which would also include, what is your historic preservation board going to look like? What's the makeup of those people that are going to be on there to make these decisions? So we wanted you to learn about the program. We want to be a good partner with the Historical Society. This gives them access to funding so that they're able to do some of these projects that they want to do as far as preserving history in Gladstone.
Okay, and then can the Historical Society do this without becoming a board or a commission under the city's purview and still maintain their own group and not have to move it up I say up a level, and I don't mean it like that. My apologies. Move into a board or commission within the city? They can still just maintain the status quo as what they're doing now?
Well,
Yeah.
right now in chapter 2.48 of the Gladstone Municipal Code, there's a historic preservation policy that was created in 1980, and I'm not sure we've ever used it.
Okay.
In there is a review board of officers, meetings, rules, and procedures that states that there will be one representative from the Gladstone Historical Society and 4 citizens. A lot has changed since 1980, and you may want to revisit what's in the current code and make modifications to that. You may want to bring in a professional architect or somebody that has experience with designating historic properties. They would be the Historical Society would be part of that, but they wouldn't necessarily become the overarching historic board for this.
It might be a good analogy. You know, we have a library foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that raised money in support of our local library. But the foundation itself was separate from the library board, which was that city-related advisory group, although they did have a representative on there. So I would think that would be a pretty close analogy to the situation, because in order to join this program, we have to designate a local city level board. And there's certain criteria for who can serve on it and who can't. But having that connection to an already existing nonprofit would be a real advantage in doing this. Now, another comment you made, Administrator Betts, you said something about if a person wanted to be on that list of historic properties. This group can't just say, well, you know, we understand that your home was the location of the first microwave oven in the city of Gladstone, so we're going to designate you as a historical property. And if you want to change your windows, you can do it in the back, but not in the front. At what point does the owner of a property have say whether or not they become historical property? Curry, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, so when the ordinance gets created, if you take this on and create an ordinance, there has to be a process as part of it for local historic landmark designation. And that is a public process, just like your land use that your planning commission does. And they have to want to participate. When it is a district, that is a little bit different. It becomes a little bit more like zoning, where you have a big group of properties, but I think that is far down the road.
All right, and we live close to Oregon City, which has a very prominent historical district. So I think some of us have enough experience and knowledge of that to know the difference. And then, you know, other cities have individual properties or individual houses that have this status. And so it'll be good for us along the way to learn those distinctions. So are there other questions? Go ahead, Councilor Alexander.
I just wonder, since we have the opportunity right now, I know we don't take public comment, but Kim runs our historical, you know, and she puts that in the newspaper or section every. Do you get to talk to Curry ever on your own, or do you have a question for her or anything you'd like to ask or explain? Or
this is a learning experience.
Okay.
And I don't have a question yet, but I know I'm gonna have questions.
All right.
All right, I think we all will. Ms. Huey said she doesn't have questions now, but will have in the future. And I think that's the case for all of us. This has been a very excellent introduction to this process. I'm glad to know that we have some language in our code already. It gives us a starting point for developing policies that coincide with the rules that are required for this to be a part of this program. So I think this is a good first step for us to get this knowledge, and I hope that staff will continue to explore this in the future. All right.
One more
Oh,
question.
one more question from Councilor Darling.
Administrator Betts, what was the ordinance number you mentioned that I just wanted to be able to read it over?
It is Gladstone Municipal Code, Chapter 2.48, Historic Preservation Policy.
Okay, thank you so much.
If you go on the city website where it says the little part that says I want to, that takes you to the municipal code and all the minutes of all the old meetings going back to the 1930s and everything else. So, all right. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item. Thank you, Ms. Gill, for coming tonight and helping us. All right. Next item on our agenda is to discuss proposed changes to the home occupation section of our zoning and development code. I see that Natalie Smith, the chair of our planning commission, is here tonight. This is something that will go through them and come back to us if we decide to look at these changes, but we'll hear from staff on this one as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll give a brief introduction. And as you probably can tell from the content in the packet, we're doing a complete rewrite of this area. And if you think back, the previous city council spent a lot of time on updating our business license program. And out of that, we realized we also need to update our home occupations. So for the past year, our city recorder, our executive assistant, Haley Kratz, we brought on Heather, our planner. We've had the police department and we've had our economic development department all meeting to talk about what should this code look like. And so I'm not sure if it's Haley or Heather wants to give a brief overview.
I see that Heather is available online and Haley is present. So have you decided which one of you is going to introduce this?
I'll let Heather introduce it.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Haley. Heather, you're up.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Milch and members of council. Apologies for not sorting that out before, but happy to give an introduction. So as Administrator Betts mentioned, there was a group of city staff and myself, a consultant, but on staff, working together to try to update this language to take into account issues that we've seen and try to do a little foreshadowing of issues that might be to come. As you all know, the nature of working from home changed dramatically over the past 3.5, 4 years. So we wanted to make sure we weren't making things too difficult for people to make a living. We have previously or currently have a provision that limits the amount of your household income that can be made through a home occupation, which we all felt was outdated. We also wanted to simplify the language to make sure that people applying for a home occupation or people reviewing it and permitting it were able to really understand the language. So where we currently have 2 types of home occupation with certain criteria, we've simplified that to just have 1 type of home occupation. Instead of specifically listing the types of businesses that you can operate, we left that more generic, but specifically exempted garage sales and unpaid hobbies. We made sure that the code has a little bit of discretion for the police department, the code enforcement officer to be able to administer it, such as we didn't specifically say you can't park a business vehicle on the street, but we did say that your use can't require on-street parking to be able to have the use there. So in other words, if there was a complaint, the code enforcement officer could require that a business vehicle be parked on the site rather than on the street. So we tried to take those types of things into account. And we did have the city attorney's office review the language that you have before you this evening. So I think that's the overview of what's being proposed here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, I appreciate that. I think what you're trying to do is really balance, make it a business-friendly policy. So people who want to do home occupation businesses can do it. And at the same time, the reason we had this code in the first place was a lot of these businesses are in residential districts where there's an expectation from residents that they won't be impacted the same way they would if they lived in a commercial district surrounded by businesses. So you're balancing the residents' need with the business need. And from what I've seen, I appreciate what you've done. You've removed some ambiguities, some terminology here that's a little too subjective. And I know that in order to get compliance, it's helpful to have things that are a little easier to understand and not such gray areas. So I appreciate this as a good start, and I'll open it up to questions from council members who may have highlighted anything that that they caught their eye.
I had two.
Okay, Councilor Garland, go ahead.
Okay, I have two. One is the parking that I had kind of read over this and thought, well, if you're requiring a home to have parking, but you're not requiring other dwellings to have parking, how does that work? That's my first question. And then number two, on page 2-5, and I'm saying 2-5 in our packet. Okay, it says, and number two, it talks about deliveries. I have neighbors who get Amazon daily, sometimes twice a day, even on Sundays. So are we sure that can't be a little bit more like the size of the delivery? Like you can't have pallets delivered to your house kind of thing, rather than just that 3 deliveries per week. It just caught my eye, that did. So I'll allow you guys to maybe answer those two, and that would be all I had.
Thank you, Councillor Garlington. Those are great questions. The parking question, I think what you're referring to is I know we've talked about the climate-friendly and equitable communities where we can't require a minimum number of parking spaces in a lot of areas of town. And this did come up when we were all meeting to talk about it. And so what we all said was, just because we can't require you to have one as for your use, we can still require that you don't have to use the on-street parking. So if you have a vehicle associated with your home occupation, you may be required to have parking on site to support that so that you're not putting the vehicle on the street. We're not telling you have to have a vehicle or not have a vehicle, but if it becomes an issue where it can't be parked on the street, then you would have to have a parking space for it on your property. So it's not mandating that you provide a vehicle parking space on your property for a home occupation, but it is saying that we can require it not to be on the street. So that's that one. It's not, we can't say you have to have the parking space if it falls within the CFEC guidelines, I think is the other way to answer that. And then the second piece there is a great point. And I think I would defer to if Haley has any comments on that. I think that's a carryover from the current language about deliveries to the house per week. And I think the pallet idea is a really good idea, or some other limit in the type of or quantity of materials.
Which, even though it is red, it is a carryover of what the current language said. It was just in a different location. So that's why it is red. But I agree that is something that we can look at is the size.
So I'm going to scoot back really quick. This is a work session. I feel like we can have a little bit of a conversation on the parking thing. I'm just throwing this idea out there, maybe differentiating between a vehicle in your home as a home owner and a vehicle that is, I'm not going to call it an advertisement, but if you drive a work vehicle and it has the name of your company on the side of it, maybe that could differentiate between a work vehicle and a regular scooter mobile. I'm not sure how the language would work. I guess Chad would have to chime in on that, but maybe that could define things a little bit better, because now you don't have Bob's Dry Cleaning 7 vans down your street and somebody saying, oh no, those are to take my kids to daycare. Being the
Yeah.
fact that they've got an advertisement on the side, it differentiates them from a normal everyday use vehicle.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and read the code section just in case it's not front of everyone. It reads, a home occupation shall not require any on-street parking other than that normally required for the residents. So it is intentionally vague because the code enforcement officer and the Sergeant Okerman, who is also in our group panel, thought it would be a good idea to be able to take it on a case-by-case basis. So if someone is parking Bob's Dry Cleaning van out front of their house, but it's not bothering anyone, and they also use it to go to the grocery store and to do all their other daily things, then perhaps it's not a problem. But if Bob has 3 vans and he's clearly not driving all 3 to get to the grocery store and the daycare, then they can come along and require those extra vans to be parked on the property. So I guess, does that get to your point, or do you
It
think?
does, but as we all know, I'm always one to make sure that things are very clear. I
Okay,
don't like to leave things up to everybody's guessing on what is or is not allowed. To say that a van with Bob's Dry Cleaning on the side is not allowed, being the fact that it is an advertisement and or a designated vehicle for a business. I think given the issues that we've had over the last couple of years over some businesses in home areas, that would have taken out any question whatsoever about whether or not a vehicle could have been parked on a cul-de-sac, a street, that taking up all of the parking, in a residential area, the one off of Glen Echo that they just put in and they only required sidewalks on one side. Both sides of that street are absolutely chock full of vehicles, and some of them are business vehicles. So I think that by differentiating on that or being specific about that would help that a lot. I don't like to leave things up to a discussion when it could be clear. And you can all take that a different way, and that's fine. That's just, I'm a little bit.
Clear and objective standards are the trend in code. You want it to be clear. You don't want a disagreement and have to deal with appeals of decisions made by your code officers. So the clearer it can be, the better. I think we agree that. And if looking at this language, if you spot something that doesn't appear that clear, that's where this feedback is helpful to those that are creating it. Chad Jacob, our city attorney, would you like to weigh in on this question too, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to say 2 quick things. First, I just want to remind everyone the process here is that this is just a work session to get some feedback from you all. We still have to go through the normal land use amendment process for the zoning code or for the development code, which means that we've got to take this to the planning commission for a public hearing. They're going to make some changes and recommendations, and then we'll bring it back to you all again for a public hearing and final approval. So what we're really trying to do here today is get some feedback along the lines of what Councilor Garlington was just doing. So that's great. The second thing that I want to point out is I just want to remind everyone that this is for the home occupation. So when you're talking about a conversation about business vehicles, you need to keep in mind that there are lots of other people who may be driving business vehicles unassociated with the home occupation. So, you may want to clarify your feedback as to whether or not you're just talking about home occupation businesses or any business vehicle, because I think there's a pretty big distinction there. And I think it's just worthwhile getting a better understanding of the feedback that you're providing.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, that's helpful. I have a neighbor who's a commercial electrician by trade. He works off-site, but he brings a vehicle home that has the name of his business and parks it in front of his house. Doesn't create a problem for the neighborhood. People might think that his house is the business, but it isn't. In fact, Heather, when you introduced this topic, you talked about one of the big changes, people working from home. And I think, did you have to develop language that made a distinction between somebody who worked for, let's say, some company in Washington County or Portland and works from their home office via Zoom for that company, that does not constitute a home occupation under our code. How do you in the code make that distinction?
That's a great point. We actually had that exact discussion because I myself work from home 3 days a week. So that came up. And we did the same thing that if you're not pulling the the business license, so I don't hold the business license for my company, it's held in Beaverton. So I'm just working from home at a remote desk station. I'm not running a business from home. So if you are pulling your business license, then you need your home occupation to accompany that, I think is where we landed on that. But Haley, please correct me if I am mischaracterizing that.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so I see Councilor Reichel nodding her head because she's identifying with this part of the conversation. She does not have a home occupation, but she is able to work from home for her business, which is not a licensed Gladstone business, I assume.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right, good. So, it's one of the examples of needing to bring the code up to, as history changes and things get different, we got to adjust them. Councilor Roberts, did you have some comments or questions?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
Looking at page 2-4, section 17.78030, section 1. I'm wondering, with the prohibition of those sorts of businesses, how many people that will exclude? How many people currently have businesses such as that we are prohibiting?
This is the prohibition on services to automobiles, RV, boats, or the like.
I do not believe we have any that are currently operating like this in the city of Gladstone.
And did we have a prohibition of this specific type of vehicle in the code that as it exists now?
It was worded a little differently, but yes, it's similar.
Okay,
similar
so
enough
we are not making a change in eliminating a kind of business which formerly, for the most part, was allowed. Okay.
It's just more it's making it more clear as to what all it covers, because we had some questions about certain like we had a person who wanted to do like washing vehicles at his house.
Okay, a detailing.
More of a detailing at his house where people bring in cars. There was issues with stormwater and things like that. So this is just more making that clear as it's just not allowed.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next page, looking at section 2, it was what Councilor Garlington was talking about. I agree that should, or it is my opinion rather, that should be broadened, because we'll also deal with people that may not only be receiving packages, but also shipping packages. And that nothing like that is stated in here. So I think that should be broadened to both include shipping and receiving, but broaden that, the minimum far beyond 3.
And Councilor Roberts, I have a follow-on to that, and I'm questioning back to Councilor Garlington's comments with that is, yes, Amazon sometimes comes 3, 4, 5 times to somebody's home. Here it says suppliers. Is that different than a UPS, a Federal Express? I'm asking staff this question.
Oh, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's how we were looking at it, but if we need to make it more clear, we can look into making it more clear
Or broader.
or broader. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we're certainly not banning regular citizens who don't have a business from getting as many deliveries as they want.
That's correct.
And some would argue that the more deliveries that are coming from other places, whether it's the grocery store or Amazon, the less driving people are doing and the less car dependent they are, which might be a good thing in some sense for the community. But this, again, reminder, this code pertains only to people who have a licensed business, licensed as a home occupation. So we're trying to limit it. And as I said before, achieve that balance between what it's like to live right next door to an actual commercial business and what it's like to live next door to a neighbor who happens to give guitar lessons to local students or something like that. Counselor Reichel, let's see.
We'll work
I'll let you finish.
I've got a lot to go.
You got a lot to go. Okay. All right. We'll stick with Counselor Roberts for a while and I'll get back to Counselor Reichel next. Go ahead.
In reading through, continuing same section, moving on to section 4, same page. Are we looking at when people's businesses expand and say they have an excess of material, debris, trash, whatever it accumulates outside of their home? How do we address that? Because as is, our code enforcement deals with that for other homes where trash and debris accumulates outside the home. But how is that handled any differently? And what is then considered trash? What is considered, I say almost an air quote, storage? How do we facilitate that? Where do we draw the line, I think is my question.
Heather?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and respond to that. Thank you, Councilor Roberts. I don't think we do draw the line. I think if the police department is already using the nuisance code to address issues in residential zoning districts, they would continue to do that. And it wouldn't matter if you have a home occupation because you shouldn't be storing materials outside or garbage or, that's not part of what the home occupation allows. So this is for inside the building.
Okay, thank you. Okay, page 2-7 at the top, what's now section 11. I wanted just a little bit of clarification on what this looks like, because I think the clarification I was looking for is what are we referencing as large alterations? Could that be someone bumping out their existing office to include another maybe 16 square feet outside their home? Or what are we talking about here?
And I'll jump in, but Haley, I think I might need your help on this one. So this is existing language that Haley just clarified by wordsmithing a bit. So this is currently in the code, and I think it's getting to the point that if you're expanding your space in your home, the square footage of your footprint of your house for the business, specifically only for the business, it might be time to move into a commercial space. Instead of investing in the business in the home, we'd like to see you launch into a commercial space. So I think that's why you would limit someone from expanding specifically for the home occupation. But if someone has a home and they decide, I would like to have more space for all the uses, or I want to reconfigure, I don't think you would not allow that by this section of the code. Again, I don't know that we would know necessarily that a building permit for a addition to a home is specific to the home occupation. I will admit we don't check building permit submittals to see if they have an active home occupation. So we're not currently actively enforcing this.
I think that's sort of where my query was going to head.
Yeah. So is this even necessary language, I guess, at that point? But because it's existing and it hasn't been an issue, I think we've left it in. But if it's unnecessary and not even enforced, we could consider just not even including it.
Thank you, Heather.
That's exactly what it is. It was current language. When the city attorney took a look at this, the question that they had was significant. What is considered a significant enlargement? When we talked about it, we decided, well, if we just do enlargements, should you be enlarging your home for the sole purpose of a home occupation? Or like Heather said, should you be looking into getting into more of a commercial space? So that's why we removed the word significant there.
Okay.
So if I can jump in one more time, I just had the thought that, whether or not we're actively enforcing it, keeping it in does put a home occupation permit holder on notice that we're looking for them to expand into a commercial or industrial space from their home occupation and not expanding their residential structure for the sole purpose of increasing their business on their home site. So I guess I could see benefit in keeping it in for that reason.
Okay. I kind of ask just because I worked for a company that operated outside of the city of Gladstone, and the home was not the primary source of, or at least where the business license was held, but it was where a lot of the business operations happened, just as it was a smaller family business. And so I think that may in some cases be what we would see in our city, small family business operated within the home. And so a lot of what they did was dual sourced. The office within the home was also the office for the business. The garage stored all of their food, but also a ton of company tools. So where do we draw the line there? Or is that another case of we're not going to draw the line because as is, we don't enforce that?
Well, again, I think we've drawn the line previously by saying you have a maximum of 25% of your home or up to 800 square feet home and accessory structures. If it became an issue that someone complained, our code enforcement is complaint based, and they could go in and measure because it is part of this code that's your maximum that you can use. But if you are conducting your business, we're not going to actively go measure the space
Right.
to make sure. But I understand, like, we have tools over here, but we also have our Costco that we just picked up and our toilet paper is there, and we're going to use that for home and not for the business. And like, I don't think anyone's looking to get to that level, but I understand what you're saying. And I think having the enforceable sections in here saying you're limited to this amount of square footage or this percentage of the overall site, and that you have to follow these certain rules does allow the code enforcement to be able to address that if a complaint is issued, but nobody is planning to take that on as far as like when a home occupation is established, there's no initial measurement, there's no review of the building footprint, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. I have more, but I know Councilor Garlington has a question to go with.
Oh, I was going to let Councilor Reichel go next, if that's okay.
I think it was in the same section.
Oh,
I'm right at the same.
the same section. All right, go ahead.
I wanted to know if on line 11, if the ADUs if somebody moved their business out of their home and maybe put an ADU in the backyard for a home office, he shed, she shed kind of thing. I think that would be an important thing to note, given how popular that's become since our COVID years, plural. Just throwing it out there.
We actually did, I'll let you go, Heather, because we did talk about that. That is one of the things that is kind of addressed on a previous page.
Yes, on page 2-5, subsection 4 does include any accessory buildings on the site with the home floor, gross floor area. So you're still limited to 800 of all of those spaces, 800 square feet or 25%, whichever is less. So we did address that because we also feel like that is a new and growing trend.
So the difficult thing on this issue is trying to decide whether they did the expansion or did the unit in order to do the business, or if they just, put a shed in the backyard and then decided, hey, I could do an interior design business back then and have clients come in and talk to me. So what is the sequence? So that's one of the hard things. One of those gray areas that will require some thinking on the part of the people trying to urge compliance. All right, Councilor Reichel, we'll give you a turn to weigh in on this one. Sorry for the wait.
No problem at all. I'm happy to wait. It's a good conversation. So I am struggling to find the spot that I had a question about and it's more just kind of a request that as this is continued to be edited and put into its final stage, that there was a portion talking about the annual business license, I believe it was, or a license to the business or to the city, sorry. Where it said something about this needs to be submitted to the planning department, and that was crossed out and it said just city. And I cannot find it now, so,
I see it
I'm
on
just-
page 2-9, 17.78.060 sub 1.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the only thing that I was gonna request is that, yep, there it is, right there. That maybe it says with the city and whatever specific department that would go to, because, does it go to, who do you file that with? Just to make sure that anyone who has questions as they're establishing their businesses here, that they're clear on where they need to go. And that's really all that I was requesting. Or, just to consider maybe rewording that so that it's helpful.
That's a great point. Thank you. And
Like the city administrator.
Well,
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just put Jackie's name. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
We've used, there's a great language, the city administrator or their designee, which gives us the flexibility to make changes along the way, but certainly, it incorporates it sort of by reference. You don't have to change the whole code if you decide, oh, it should go to the city recorder instead of the city administrator. We'll look at that, and that's helpful. That's helpful.
And just the reason why it is as vague as it is because depending on the type of complaint would depend on the department it goes to. If it is a complaint that code enforcement needs to go out and take a look at, it would be code enforcement that reviews it. If it's one that the police department, if it elevates more, the police department would have to. So that's the reason why it's so vague. If you bring it to the city, we'll get it to where it needs to go, type of thing. But we could put city administrator or designee like we use in most of other code.
And I think Counselor Reichel is looking at it from that perspective of if I'm going to file a complaint, where does it go at the city? And so I agree. I'm fine with adding to the city administrator or its designee language there.
I support that
Thank
language.
you. I think a lot of our community members struggle with, okay, I need to, bring something to the attention of so-and-so, but how do I do that? So I think that is where I'm coming from, just asking for that clarification.
The sort of general advice given on social media is call the non-emergency number at the police department, for just about anything. And so the better a system we have, and then the more flexibility we have to channel it in the right direction. As Haley said, each circumstance might warrant a different kind of response or different level. So that's good to know.
Thank you.
Councilor Alexander, do you have some questions?
I do. I know a few people that have business. So I just want to know is there a difference between having a business license and then health standards? And I'll tell you why I say that. I know people that do business out of their garage, nails and hair. And then I asked them one time, the person got up out of the chair, went out of the garage through their front door to go into the bathroom. I said, why are you doing that? There's a door right there. It's closer. They just go that way. They said, the health code wouldn't let them. So you have a business license, you're doing hair or nails in your garage, but you can't walk through the garage door into the bathroom. Is that something you guys know about? Because I know 3 people doing that right now, and they say they don't want to violate it, so they go out the front door and then let them go use their restroom. I mean, so there's nothing in the business here about here except right here on number 4 where it says the accessory shall not exceed 800 square feet for 25%. So that if you're here if I can tell them, then you got a business license, you're doing business here, they can walk right in there and go down the hall to your bathroom, right?
I can answer that.
Okay.
Oh, Councilor Garlington.
When you go to a hair salon that is in someone's home, or even if it's in a place of business, their Oregon standards have their own set of rules to do anything in order to keep your license and to keep your insurance intact. So that's where that comes in. I was surprised at how stringent that is as well, but that far exceeds what the city would require for people to get their hair done.
So they can get a business license and do it. That's just a health standard thing. Has nothing to do with the city.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, health standards go through the county and the state.
All right. Councilor Cook, you had a comment. Welcome.
Hi, yes, thank you. And I apologize for being late this evening. I had an emergent issue at work. So apologies if you guys have already discussed this, but it seems like there was a change in on page 2-6, 17.78.020, paragraph 5. Previous to this, home occupancy had limits to either 6 trips a day or 10 trips a day. And it looks like that is now changed to a more general standard of not generating excessive traffic or monopolizing parking. It just seems like that goes against the trend of making the standard more generalized. And so my question is, in this case, if someone has a complaint about a home occupancy generating excessive traffic or monopolizing parking, who's the deciding party about what is excessive or what monopolizes parking?
Yeah, this is one where we've gone from a specific, very specific objective standard to one that's a little more subjective. So how would you respond, either attorney or planner on this one?
Thank you, Counselor Cook. I think I have the response to this one. We did talk about that with our meetings that we held, and the deciding person right now is our code enforcement officer with the help of, the overseeing sergeant from the police department. And then, of course, like anything that's in the development code, I think that I'm often brought in to discuss that as well, as far as it being a code issue. So it's really going to be in the code enforcement officer's hands, I believe, primarily to address that. But you are right, it is a more general standard. Again, we felt like the number of trips to the site, if you're teaching those guitar lessons, you may have 30-minute lessons from 3 to 7 p.m. And, if my own children took piano in the neighborhood, and I would often send one at a time, and then I would come, and then I'd go take someone else to soccer and come back. So I probably contributed over 6 trips some of those times just to that one house in an hour-and-a-half period. So we felt like having it be more general was more business friendly, but also then did allow some discretion with the code language as provided.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying. I don't necessarily have any concerns about that. I just wanted to understand it a bit better. So that helps.
Yes, and I'll put in a plug for the city's code enforcement website. Also, I know Mayor Milch mentioned calling the non-emergency number, but there is an online form that's very useful as well, and allows the code enforcement officer to gather a lot of information up front so that they can, Yvonne, can figure out what she's dealing with and be prepared to address it.
All right, that's helpful to know. Thank you. All right, are there other questions from counselors? Counselor Alexander, you had yours answered. You said you had maybe a couple more. Counselor Roberts.
I do. Thank you, Mayor. Back on page 2-7, looking at the now section 13. I want to know if there's anything anywhere else mentioning a total square footage or anything. What's to stop someone from putting up a large number of 1 square foot signs? Where's our delineation?
Oh, it's a total.
Is that for the entire home? There's only 1 square foot allowed for business advertising.
That is
correct?
how the current code reads.
Okay.
And that is the intent, and knowing that you're confused by reading that makes me think we could do a better job of making that more clear. So we'll add that to the list to make sure. But the intent is 1 square foot in whatever way you want to use that. You could advertise your business.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the lack of clarity there.
No, that's great.
And then moving on to the now stricken through original section 10, any materials used. I wanted to know kind of the reasoning or the thought process and conversations as to why that is now stricken through.
Haley, I think I can answer this one. We discussed why is this stricken through? This is a good question, because we did discuss not storing anything on the outside. So actually, maybe I can't respond to that. I can't remember where we moved that to. Do you know, Haley?
I am looking right now. I believe it is one of the things that we reworded and put in 1778-040, but I haven't found it exactly yet.
The intent is to make sure that everything is within the structures, whether it's the garage or the accessory structure or the main house, and to not have anything stored outside. So if we missed that, we should definitely put that back in.
So if I could jump in real quick, I think if you look at 1778-040 sub 4, which is a section we've talked about a little bit already today on 2-5, the first sentence says the home occupation shall be operated entirely within the dwelling unit and any conforming accessory structure. So I'm guessing that the intent was that this language would cover the language that was deleted, because everything has to be inside the structure, the accessory structure or the primary dwelling unit.
And the last sentence of that same paragraph says indoor storage of materials or products shall comply with the building, fire, health, and housing codes. It doesn't reference outdoor storage, but the idea is that, you know, this entirely within means everything needs to be indoors.
Thank you so much, Chad, for catching that. We both knew it was there somewhere, but we couldn't remember off the top of our head. I wouldn't have a concern with adding a sentence to subsection 4 saying no storage of materials outside of the structures shall be permitted, or something like that.
I think a little redundancy here. I would appreciate that. So adding some of that language back just to clarify it a little bit. And what's
in that same section that we just talked about, so that it's clear that.
Yeah, maybe just re-adding some of that language from stricken through 10 to the new section 4.
Okay.
However that fleshes out. And then kind of on the same note, but a little bit to the side, what's to stop someone from erecting a temporary carport and covering 3 sides with tarps and calling that storage space for their business? And I understand I use the word temporary, but say someone buys a very nice one for the sake of the silly argument.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that sentence that Chad just read does read home occupation entirely within the dwelling unit and any conforming accessory structure. I might just peek at the accessory structure definition really fast, because I believe it is accessory use or accessory structure means structure incidental to the main use. It doesn't say what it's made out of. So we could, I hear what you're saying.
So an accessory structure, as it stands now, could very well be 8x8 temporary tent setup that has stuff under it. Is that correct?
We do reference that it is an accessory building in the next sentence. So
one says structure, one says building.
One says structure, one says building. Yeah.
And I don't mean to be nitpicky with it, but I want to clarify
great.
because I like our city looking clean, and I've been to other cities that don't look as clean. So I want to clear all that up now so that we can kind of continue to maintain a cleanly standard.
I'll pop in here. Administrator Betts and I do have some history with this because 5 years ago when I was in the city council, we were working on amending some of our what we generally refer to as nuisance codes, and the idea of something we called membrane structures, I think that was the term we were using, was basically these portable tent things. And what we were trying to go for at that time was, if you want to put one up in your driveway so you can fix your car in the rainstorm, that's okay, but we didn't want people having it up all the time as just a way of enlarging their garage without actually enlarging their garage. That's kind of what we were going for. Whatever we came up with at the time, I think we got some feedback from the code compliance department at that time that what we finished with maybe was difficult to enforce. It was just vague enough that it created some problems. And so we didn't get as much maybe enforcement of it as we had hoped for. I'm glad you're bringing it up again in the context of this. and whether the community would be more amenable to allowing us to do that, I don't know. But you see a lot of people who have recreational vehicles with a structure on the outside. They won't fit in their garage, obviously, and they're not building a structure under building code to put them in. But we tried to do a law that would have setback requirements on their placement and some other things so that they would be close to a built structure, even if they were just a temporary structure. But as I said, we may not have come out with the best results on that one. It might be something we'll try to do in the future. But I think it's very similar to the issues that you're raising here. You don't want people to kind of skirt around something if the intent is to keep it as residential in appearance as it, as the zoning district in which it lies.
So possibly, and I agree, because also trying to grandfather in existing membrane structures becomes an issue. Do we need to have "and any conforming accessory structure," or can we end the sentence at "within the dwelling unit"?
Well, we have made reference to accessory dwelling units, which I think would fall under that accessory structure. We might just have to be more specific as to which kinds of accessory structures a business can work in. We allow people to do a shed of a certain size without a lot of requirements and different setback rules. Something like 400 square feet or smaller, I think. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then we have larger square footage allowances for an accessory dwelling unit. And it's possible to be more specific and make some decisions from the outset on which ones we're going to consider as an accessory unit.
I agree. I think there needs to be a more defined what is accessory structure.
Yeah.
Yes, because we don't want the tarps. They're up now and we can't enforce them. And that's what we're trying not to encourage.
Right. I'd like to see something that says that we can enforce, the tarps, as you put it. But also, in my mind, leaving it somewhat complaint driven. I'm content with that. But I think that having that language in here that does give someone like Yvonne the ability to enforce that, that's important to me.
All right. Councilor Alexander.
Oh, I was just gonna say, when you did that on the council, wasn't the end result, if you had a membrane structure, it had to sit back from the farthest face of your house? Wasn't that the rule we came up with? If your house sits here, this isn't further, you could put your membrane structure right behind your house. It couldn't be out in the open. And I think that was where we ended with that. You could do that. So to Councilor Roberts, thing, if you had one back behind your house, you're in compliance. That's behind your house. But then if you did put tarps, and you could store things for your.
Was that adopted language or?
We'll have to look back to see what, but as I referenced, I think what we were hoping to get at that time was to say, if you're doing this in lieu of building, let's say a garage, if you built a garage, you would have certain setback rules. It had to be a certain distance from the street, a certain distance from the house. So if you use something temporary, we were hoping we could require people to follow that same rule. It was difficult to get that. Yeah. So I don't want to revisit that rule. It was a nightmare for the council.
That was a nightmare.
If I may just, I pulled up the definition of building in the development code, and because I thought, oh, maybe we just call it a building instead of an accessory structure. But our definition of building means a structure built for the support, shelter, or enclosure of any persons, animals, chattels, or property of any kind, excepting uncovered patios or decks, not exceeding 30 inches in height above the grade of the adjoining ground. So it actually doesn't require it to have hard sides for it to be a building. So couple thoughts there. One, if the intent is to make sure that we're using just hard-sided buildings to accompany a home occupation, I think we could definitely write this language to do that. But whatever we do in the home occupation language won't help us enforce anything that's not associated with the home occupation. So anything existing or that gets put up after the date of this language, if it's not with a home occupation permit, this code won't help. So we may need to look at other things, which I know Mayor Milch just said he's not interested in doing because of the pain of the last time. But I wrote a note. We'll look at what got adopted 5-ish years ago to see what's in the code as far as membrane structures, and then see what's available there, and then make sure that what we're writing this code to requires hard-sided structures for storage, if that's where you'd like to go.
Yeah.
Does the hanging of plywood on like a sheet metal carport count as a hard side, Heather?
You're asking all the tough questions. I mean, it just would depend on how you define it. I think it would, unless you required something more specific, I would consider that a hard surface wall. So I think if you wouldn't want to see that, I mean, I guess it's how far do you want to go with
Into the
regulating?
weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the issue we had before. We had as many citizens who were saying, please don't tell me how I can store my RV or my boat, as we had also people, please don't make me have to look at your RV or your boat through the sides of a structure with a fabric roof on it. And so it's one of those things where you have to balance the needs of different people in the community, the rights of some, the responsibilities of others. And so it's what we get paid the big bucks to do up here, is, help to resolve those issues. So Heather, thank you for this. Haley, we appreciate your involvement in it. And Chad, your input too has been very helpful. This is a good starting place for us. We hope that whatever feedback we've given you tonight will help to clarify it. And then, as Chad referenced earlier, we'll go through the regular process of having public hearings to make legislative changes, and eventually it'll come back to us to act upon at the end. And I hope that everything that we're concerned about will get incorporated well into that. Does anyone else on the council have anything else, or can we move on to the next item?
I have one question.
One question from Councilor Garland.
When you send out the home occupation licensing, please pay your share at the end of the year, do people get a copy if you have changed the verbiage on home occupation or home? What is it called again? Sorry, home occupations. Would they get it? Would they normally get a copy? And with this significant change, is it something that we would consider sending for anyone who's signed up for a license?
So when we did the business license code last year, we sent, with our business license renewals, we sent notice saying the code has been updated. Here you can go to take a look at it. I'm assuming we will do the same thing for the home occupation.
Okay.
But this will not apply to any current, I believe.
Right. That there isn't a requirement to update your home occupation permit annually as there is for your business license. And so anyone who has a current home occupation permit is still subject to the standards under which they received their home occupation permit. And as long as they continue operating legally, they will continue to have that home occupation permit. And so new home occupations after the adoption and effective date of this language will be required to meet these sections.
So you're saying that anybody that had a home occupation before these were passed are not subject to these rules?
Correct.
Okay.
They're approved. We don't require an annual home occupation permit review.
Okay, I just wanted to share one more thing.
Okay.
Because I did look on the websites for the other cities, because I always think, well, how do other people do it? And I'm sure that that's one of the things that you guys looked at. But one of the lines that really caught my attention was Wilsonville. And one of the things that they say on their guidelines is keep it simple. It should not be obvious that you are conducting a business in your home. If it becomes an issue, you will need to consider moving the business to a retail commercial office space. And this is just on their website. And then it says, if you want to do this, go here. And I thought that that was really good language for saying exactly what Mr. Jacobs was saying. Basically, I think it was you. I'm sorry. If you get too big, if you're outgrowing your space, consider moving it. But I like the way that they had the website set up so that it deferred to just simple, clean
Yeah,
asks.
not a hard rule, but just a very friendly worded suggestion.
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Councilor Roberts?
I have nothing further. I just wanted to thank the staff that put time into this. And there were several other things I noted in here and highlighted through with a check mark that I thought were great additions. I just had a number of other things to note. So thank you all for your time.
Well, thank you, Council, for the time in looking at this, and we'll move on to our next item. Heather, we appreciate your being here with us.
Thanks for having me. Take
You're
care.
welcome. Okay, next item on our agenda regards an update on the use of our American Recovery Plan funds called ARPA funds. So staff,
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We put this on the agenda to have a check-in with the council to discuss whether or not you would like us to spend any of the $280,944 that are remaining. We have until the end of 2024 to designate how we're going to spend that. We've hired Marcy, and we have some ideas of maybe how we can spend some of that, but we just wanted to have a check-in to see if any of you would like to throw out ideas on how that funding should be spent.
I have one idea, and it kind of goes back to something we discussed earlier tonight, our first item regarding the Certified Local Government Program, and it reminded us that we have a historical society here. I've heard from time to time over the years that some of the artifacts similar to like that desk that we have now on display in City Hall, we have other artifacts that at some point might be able to be put on display here in the city or in our new library when it gets completed, or in some other way if we ever get a museum. But right now, some of those things are just being stored in people's basements or garages, maybe if the city could provide some funding, now that the Historical Society is a nonprofit organization, would the city be amenable to paying the cost of getting a storage unit where those artifacts of historical value could be stored together, and no individual member of that committee would have to run the risk of, oh no, what if I have a fire in my garage and I burn down some piece of Gladstone history? I don't know what the cost of that would be, but if it qualifies under the terms of ARPA funds, that's something that might be a good way to spend some funds.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would qualify for that. I'm not sure. I know this is a good time to talk about it because yes, they've become a nonprofit. They're going to try to do fundraising. Ultimately, like I said earlier, the goal is to get a building for a museum. But I do think a storage unit would be a good step if the city wanted to allocate $3,000 to $5,000. I'm sure that would get them 4 to 5 years worth of storage. I don't know. Councilor Alexander, what are your thoughts about that?
I could look into it, or even I agree with Mayor 100% because that's a big issue that we need the storage. I've even went to Camp Withacombe and they have storage there and they have it all climate controlled and everything. But they said there would be a little nominal fee to get some of our stuff in, so I could look into that, and that would be a very safe place and climate controlled and everything. Because yeah, we also reached out to the people at Spirit Mountain, and they, signs and things that they have that pertain to Gladstone history. They actually have some there. So we're going to take a trip and go through their museum and talk to them about what they have that we could bring to Gladstone to represent them too. But they don't want to just let stuff come here. We don't got any place to keep.
Well, and it also then, I think if we had things in one common place too, it would settle the issue of somebody thinking, well, it's in my basement, it's mine. We'd want to clarify that these things belong to the city or to the society, or, we'll establish some means of saying who really owns them and who has the right to see how they're used.
Well, Jackie's been awesome when she let us. Have you seen the chairs in the?
Yeah.
See, those are like priceless.
Well, now that we have new buildings, it's these make nice amenities to the building. Counselor Cook, you have your hand up. I'll call on you.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So, I mean, gosh, what a pleasure. How often do we get approached with, hey, here's some money. How do you want to spend it? So it's a bit of an open brief, but I do have a proposal or an idea. So knowing that Gladstone is in a childcare shortage, an extreme childcare shortage within Clackamas County that also has an extreme shortage of childcare providers. Talking to my neighbors and also going through this process myself as a parent, there is a significant gap between where demand is for childcare and where supply is. And then, kind of contributing to that gap is the fact that when childcare is available, it's not affordable. And so many parents rely on ERDC, which is state supported support for childcare. The challenge is that not all child care providers accept ERDC. And the issue there is that the state does not reimburse the full cost of childcare. They reimburse a partial cost. And so not all providers are able to accept ERDC. So my thought is that it might be worthwhile for Gladstone to look at opportunities to maybe provide very small grants, really micro grants, to help close the gap between the cost of childcare and the ERDC funds that are provided to childcare providers. My thought here is that would provide two benefits. One, we'd be supporting the families in our community with finding childcare and allowing parents to get to work. A lot of times parents want to get back to work. And most often, let's be honest, it's women who are stuck with childcare responsibilities. So this would support families in allowing both parents to get back to work if that's something that they want to do. And then it would also support the small businesses in our community, the childcare providers, with allowing them to, get funding that would be adequate to allow them to provide childcare and meet the needs of the community. So a little bit of a convoluted thought there, but I really think that there's an opportunity for us to help make childcare more affordable and accessible in Gladstone.
Thank you for that suggestion. I think it's one of those things where with a lot of the ARPA funds, the funds that were invested turned out to have a greater return than the amount that was actually spent because it benefited a lot of things. So if, as you say, it's a benefit to families, enables them to keep working, to going to work because they have childcare for children, and it's a benefit for those businesses that provide that childcare, then those kinds of expenditures would have, multiple levels of impact, positive impact on the community. Other counselors? Yes, Counselor Garlington.
I have two thoughts. I'm going to go back to, and I've touched base with Jackie on this one, or Administrator Betts, my apologies. The paint for downtown Portland. I know that sometimes it's available for free, and I know that that's something that you guys are already in the works of. I just want to put that as number 3. I think, a coat of paint goes a long ways with making building more appealing as a person is driving up and saying, is this where I want to get my next yard of fabric? Is this where I want to get my kids' clothes? Is this? So I love that. I like that. I wouldn't even mind seeing a third mural somewhere. I don't know if you've thought about different places for that, but I think those murals are bar none. I mean, I see them on just the craziest places on social media, on just on Google, period. You can hashtag Gladstone mural, and these are people that don't even live in Gladstone, that have come by and driven through our town for whatever reason. So I'm all about paint in some way, however that works for you.
And I'm sure the mayor will tell you exactly where he thinks our next mural should be, or Miss Jory as well, because it has come up.
Okay,
Yeah.
it cannot go on the
Well,
side of your house.
Once
I'm
we
sorry.
start thinking about it, every time you see a blank wall that's not painted, you think that would be a good mural site, right?
Exactly.
Right, Marcy? Is that how?
The
Yeah.
post office.
Yeah.
Oh, amen.
Yeah.
Please, yes. So, and then of course, I'm gonna speak up for our parks. We've gotten thank you. $2.7 million and $100,000 of it has gone towards our parks, and our parks are the number 2 reason that people come to Gladstone. And people come to Gladstone and use our parks, and maybe as a third item, even a second item before the parks. They go to our restaurants, they go to our other parks, they go to our schools, they go to our small sales, they visit our library at the same time. There are many reasons why people use our parks, and to have only given $100,000 out of $2,700,000 to me is just not enough. I mean, we should be looking at somewhere near, I'm sorry, but another, $500,000 somewhere. Matching grants, upgrading things. It should just be a no-brainer. This is why people come to Gladstone. We have to capitalize on that for our businesses, or our businesses will not thrive if people don't have an additional reason to be here. So I just don't see how anybody can look past that. We had that discussion 4 years ago, and it's got to come to fruition, or our businesses are not going to grow.
All right.
So Counselor Garlington, put a pin in that, because we do have $850,000 from Metro for our parks that we're going to be spending. Murals, paint, those are on Marcy's list that she's going to go over. I do have a question for Counselor Cook, if I could backtrack for a moment. Counselor Cook, you said, and I apologize, what is the child tax credit referred to again? REDIC?
Yeah, it's called ERDC, and it stands for
ERDC.
employment related daycare credit. And so the purpose of this is for families who are really facing the choice of, can I send a parent to work? Or are they not going to make enough money at work to pay for daycare? It allows daycare assistance for families to allow a parent to go back to work. The challenge is just that funding gap is, that may only be $200 a month or $300 a month, something that, with this budget of $280,000, these micro grants could go a really long way in helping get Gladstone families the ability to go back to work if that's something that they want to do as a family.
So how about if staff follows up? We currently have a contract with St. Vincent de Paul that allocates funding for utility billing assistance and other needs. Kathy and I will follow up to see if that is something, if we allocated funds towards, that they would be able to administer for Gladstone families. Can we see if that would qualify and bring that information back to the council?
Can I ask something on that? That although it is Gladstone families, I think that maybe not everybody in Gladstone has daycare in Gladstone. So if we could reach beyond just Gladstone providers and maybe just the specification of a Gladstone family.
I believe that would be possible if what we're looking for is more or less an impartial means, an impartial means of qualifying the families. And it would correlate to residency, not so much where the child is actually in daycare.
And one other thing on this, along the same line, and Planning Commission Chair Smith is here tonight. You remember we had a request from a church on Glen Echo that wanted to provide childcare. And one of the requirements in order to meet their licensing was they had to have a certain amount of outdoor play area on the property, which would require some modifications of their facilities. I don't know what progress has been made toward completing that project, but if that were maybe one of the things that has kept them from proceeding, they might say, well, we have the classroom, we have the indoor space, we just don't have the money to put up a fence to create an outside play area. If the city were able to assist with that, for example, if that were actually the issue, maybe they would want to go ahead and continue that project that's had approval from the planning commission.
And you're referring to the church that was formerly the Assembly of God on Pleasant?
Yes, that's correct.
They never proceeded.
They never proceeded with doing it.
Right. And it expired a year and a half ago.
Okay, well.
But we're happy to look into this option to see if we're able to allocate it to families that need it for childcare, and we can bring back some information on that.
Good. That would be good, worthy research. Thank you.
I just have one more.
Thank you for that.
I think they're all great ideas. I mean, the childcare, the parks, the historic, all of it. But anything left over after we take care of those? Infrastructure. Because people have to drive on these streets to get to all those things.
And that's where most of it, or quite a bit of it, went originally. We did, every city in the country got these funds allocated, and every city and county and state, chose different ways to spend them. And it's one of the great things that we do have that choice at the local level. And so good. That's good input too.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Does anybody know if I know that maybe Councilor Reichel could answer this. The Parks Department, the Parks Board picked out trash cans and benches and things like that to make everything uniform in the city. Did they get funding for that?
Yes, if I remember correctly, I believe it's, I would have to go back to my notes. It was earlier this spring that we really discussed that. The majority of it was covered by the budget for the year. I want to say that perhaps Meldrum was excluded from that only because there were other things that were going to start happening at Meldrum. But I believe that all of the other parks in the city will have cohesive everybody. Yes, all of that should have been covered. Sorry. If I remember correctly.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I could, before we wrap up, I'm going to have Marcy give a kind of a list.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Councilor Reichel had one more item. Yes.
I'm not necessarily a different item, but to continue that conversation regarding the childcare. And perhaps this is not the right time and place, but if possible, can we get an update on the county's plan with the former YMCA building on Webster Road? I know that they had been considering putting in a child care center there.
And that
but
was
I haven't
dependent,
heard anything about it in a while, so I was curious.
that was dependent on some federal funds, and we'll try to get an update. Do we have one, or we?
I recently joined the policy council for the Clackamas County Children's Commission, and we actually did just get an update. I mean, it's kind of a non-update update. They have applied for the funds. They will not find out probably until December if they get the federal funds needed to procure and start work on those buildings. There's one here in Gladstone and then one in Milwaukee, but they are very optimistic that it's going to go in that direction. It's just going to take a little bit of time. And of course, there's at least, a year plus of renovations and things that they'll need to do before they're able to open their doors, but they are very much looking forward to that.
Okay.
Thank you for
very
representing
much.
us
I
there.
appreciate that.
Counselor.
Okay, and is there something going on?
Counselor Cook has her.
Oh, Counselor Cook, go ahead.
I guess just a note, I think that, my idea for potential, micro grants to secure gap funding between ERDC funds and what providers need, that was just one example. But I think if we have a broader conversation with daycare providers in Gladstone, to try and find out if there are gaps. So instead of saying, hey, we think this is the solution, maybe we just start the conversation and say, hey, we noticed were asking questions around opening a daycare provider and that fell through. If we can start asking questions around and finding out where those challenges are, and then maybe looking at some more open-ended grants to be able to assist childcare providers in actually opening capacity. That would be great.
Right. It shouldn't be us to make an assumption as to why somebody who proposed doing childcare ended up not doing it. Certainly, it's not for the lack of a market. That is there, but maybe it's a hard business to do successfully, and maybe the workforce issue is another part of it. Okay, Councilor Roberts.
Thank you. My only suggestion at this time is I'd like to open the conversation of earlier in the year, we had put forth, I believe it was $5,000 in conjunction with the school district to the food bank. I believe that is still an ongoing issue, and we only floated it for the remainder of the year. And so if it's reasonable, I think that would be a discussion I'd like to open up with the school, perhaps come our November meeting, that we would be willing to put forth half of that again, just as we did before.
And some staff and the chair of the school board and the mayor are going to be meeting early in November to have another discussion on that. So we'll see, we'll take that input and look at it a little bit more deeply.
And just to clarify, it was $10,000 that the city contributed.
10 each. Okay. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. One thing we discovered in looking at this issue is that there are other agencies in the community that provide food to families and individuals. And whether some coordination of that effort or consolidation of somehow would help, that's one of the things we want to look at too.
Thank you.
All right. The fourth item on our agenda is the updated city council agenda planning document. I really appreciate staff having this. And Councilor Roberts one time asked me, where do I find it? And I said, I think it's in Jackie's report sometime. And I found which monthly meeting so we can get to it. But there are a lot of things coming up, and you don't throw everything at us in one meeting. You kind of space it out and time it in a way that we can work on it effectively and have plenty of time to think about things. Work sessions like this in advance of the real work get us prepared. And so is there anything you'd like to share or ask us about this preliminary schedule?
Just that I think we've had a great year, and I think it is important that you see the big picture, and there are no surprises coming before you. Obviously, there are some things that come up in between meetings that we need to get on the agenda. But, management is very proud of the accomplishments that we've had, and also forward looking to see a lot of infrastructure projects coming up in 2024 that you guys will be awarding bids to. So if you'd like, we can start putting this in every regular city council packet at the end of the packet so that you have that information.
I see some heads nodding and confirmation of that. So yes, please.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
please, from Councilor Reichel.
From Councilor Reichel too. I can't see all the heads nodding, but it's good to get that confirmation. All right. I think that's most of what we have for tonight. Did you have another comment?
Prior to our conclusion, I remember Ms. Jory had an update for us on funds. Was that correct? Or at least a continuation of that?
About the funds, are you speaking to ideas for the ARPA funds, kind of what we've been speaking about?
Oh, yeah.
I remember
It was-
Administrator Betts had mentioned you wanted to speak on that further.
You had a list?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Certainly, thank you.
I'm happy to, and I will just kind of list some of the ideas out, and then we can, revisit this. I know that you all probably want to get home, so I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. It is something I'm very excited about. As you know, I've been working a lot with the local business owners and doing some informal, you may or may not know, some informal surveying on kind of what they'd like to see that would make them feel more supported as business owners in Gladstone, specifically around our downtown district, because we recently became a connected community in relationship with Oregon Main Street Network, which is an amazing feat. And I have really a lot of optimism about what that can possibly turn into in the future. That being said, the vibrancy and economic vitality of a city is directly correlated with the vibrancy and vitality of a downtown district. And now that we have a downtown district on Portland Avenue and then beyond just a little bit in that I believe it's a C2 zone, right? Okay, I'm learning these things. Okay, great. We have a really big opportunity here. And I was kind of nodding my head along with you, Councillor Garlington, about the painting and this, we've been calling it spiffing it up, from creating some micro grants for business owners and building owners to paint, add flower pots, clean up, do things like that, all the way up to doing facade improvement grants, which would have some sort of probably matching component, which we would explore later, where they could do things like create and take off awnings that are, dirty and gross and need to be redone, or to help preserve the integrity of the building, to anything that has to do with the facade. So it'd be windows, doors, all of that, paint, siding, whatever needs to happen. So those two things. You mentioned garbage cans and benches. When I went to the Main Street conference, I noted that downtown Independence had they had branded, garbage cans and similar benches, and it just looked really beautiful downtown. Something like that would be a great use of some of the funds. Public art installations, murals, of course, some sort of gateway beautification. And there was something else that popped into my head. And of course, I'm going to lose it. But, we're also working on a Imagine Gladstone economic development project to help get interest in and build excitement around some of the empty buildings and lots and make them not so unattractive so that people want to actually use them and maybe activate them in some way, use them, and really encourage people to come invest in their downtown. And we're really hopeful with the development of the library, and then with something like maybe facade improvement grants, this is going to really start to encourage people to start investing in their buildings and in their businesses.
So would that be like, okay, for say, the new business opened downtown on Portland Avenue, it's beautiful. They did a lot of work.
Yes.
They put a lot of their own time and money in it. Would they be eligible for one of those, or?
Well, that would ultimately, I believe, be up to city council to decide what they want that to look like. My initial thought is it cannot be for, and when I've looked at templates from other cities, I've done a lot of research with a lot of other cities, worked with a lot of other Main Street directors actually, and their general consensus is it's not retroactive. It would be for projects that are happening. That doesn't mean that they couldn't apply for a grant and do other things to improve their facade. It just means that what they've already spent would not be reimbursable.
And are you in contact with all these city businesses, or?
I am. I've been talking a lot with the city businesses, and they're all very excited, at least the downtown businesses, about this opportunity or this potential opportunity.
Okay, because it's looking really nice down there.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Marcy, for speaking to those.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One of the other general principles about, a vibrant downtown area is that a number of the businesses are open in the evening. They do encourage people who are working during the day to come down and have dinner or enjoy a show or whatever else. And that in order for people to feel safe going to businesses like that in the evening, it's important to have good lighting. And I know that that's one of the things years ago, a few years back, when the new pizza business opened, people said, "Oh, it's really exciting. We're going to have this." And then I drove past where it is and noticed, gee, it felt real dark and gloomy down there. So
thank you, sir. Yes, that was what I was thinking of, and I didn't write down was the lighting project. I have some experience in helping to work with those kind of projects. So, maybe new Christmas decorations, more lit snowflakes, but generally speaking, lighting projects for downtown to help make it feel more vibrant and alive in the evening.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate all that input and that contact and getting that community support. We can sit up here and brainstorm ideas, but to know that the businesses themselves have brought some input to this and are excited about those options too. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's just about everything we have on the agenda for tonight. So we have a regularly scheduled meeting coming up in early November, and you can look in here and find out what's on the agenda so far. And So thank you, everyone, for participating tonight. For Councilor Huckabee for representing us in another capacity this evening. I believe that was tonight the first meeting of that other group for her?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And we are adjourned at 7:25 PM.